You've reached Hotel Pacifico, your five-star destination for BC politicos. Press 4 for room service. Press the star key for your hosts Mike McDonald and Kate Hammer.
Welcome back, guests. It's good to see you, Mike.
Great to see you, Kate. I'm excited for this episode today.
Well, we're doing something a little different too. It's you and me in the lobby. We're staff in the lobby. We're gonna invite our guests. We're gonna welcome our guests in just a second. But I will say we're doing something different for Strategy Suite today, right? It's you, Geoff, and a special guest.
Yeah, I think you have to go out and you have to go shop for some new chandeliers for the hotel ballroom. So
sure, yeah.
Geoff and I are going to hold down the Strategy Suite with BC Bob. BC Bob Kronbauer, the founder of Vancouver's Awesome, and looking forward to hearing his hot takes.
Me too. I'm looking forward to listening to that. And so, and I'm assuming you're going to cover a bit of, I'm sorry to say it, but events from the weekend and the assassination attempt on Donald Trump.
Yeah, we'll get into that there and many other exciting topics. But today, on our interview, we're welcoming a guest here to the Hotel Pacifico, someone who has earned many green affinity points for the Hotel Pacifico rewards plan. Dr. Andrew Weaver was the first Green MLA elected in British Columbia in 2013. He has a lengthy list of awards and honors that include the Order of British Columbia and, a Nobel Prize. He dramatically brought the three-member Green Caucus behind John Horgan's NDP in 2017 to topple the 16-year tenure of the BC Liberal Party. I once spent lovely hours in the penthouse of the Harbour Towers Hotel with Dr. Weaver, only to have him crush my dreams and break my heart. He left the Green Caucus later on to sit as an independent towards the end of his tenure in the legislature, retiring from politics in 2020, but continuing to keep busy at the University of Victoria. But has he really retired?
Mm-hmm.
In the past week, Dr. Weaver has become a rising sea level unto himself, with his opinion on Premier Eby's government spilling over the dikes and flooding the political class with speculation. Dr. Weaver, welcome to Hotel Pacifico.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's a real pleasure, and it's nice to see you again, Mike.
Yeah, it's great to see you.
I don't think we've met in person, Kate, but nice to meet you too.
Nice to meet you too.
Virtually, of course.
Well, I've heard of you though. Like you have to know, Dr. Weaver. Mike mentions the fact that you broke his heart bi-weekly. I'll say it comes up a lot. He's still healing.
Well, I remember those days very well, and it was tough, a decision, but I actually don't regret that decision because I will stand by the fact that I think John Horgan is one of the greatest premiers we've had in BC for a very, very long time. He was somebody who understood what people wanted, and he listened. He wasn't a totalitarian dictator. He brought people with him, and I just thought he was a all-around nice guy. So I've best decision I've made in my life.
Oh, I was in the middle of getting tickets to the Oak Bay Cricket Club to take you to a cricket game on that Sunday afternoon, and you went to a rugby game instead.
Well, see, you just didn't read me. Like you just got me wrong. You thought I'm a cricket guy. No, I'm a rugby guy. John's a rugby guy, right? So had you,
and the rest is history. Yeah. Well,
but I mean, it was an interesting time, and let's get into that memory lane first, then we'll get into the new stuff. But I mean, you had a pretty good relationship with Christy Clark, actually.
I did. I to this day, I have nothing bad to say about her. I quite liked her, and I thought she had a very difficult task with the breadth in her tent of the caucus from the the kind of evangelical Christian far right to the kind of federal liberal center, even center left. So it was a very broad coalition she was holding together. And that takes leadership. So I admire her even to this day. This was never about her.
Yeah, and you had some good relationships with caucus too. I recall you were getting along quite well with Mike Bernier. And
Bernier's still a good friend. I've talked to him recently, right?
Yeah.
I would like to see him reelected, but it's going to be tough where he is. But he's another guy who's a really good person.
Yeah, I mean, what struck me, without telling too many tales out of school of that process. In the negotiation process was that, it was possible to find common ground. And I think, where you obviously went a different route, made a different decision, but I think it opened my eyes to where there were possibilities for the BC Liberals of the day to work with the Greens, and probably could have been had it gone that way, it might have been interesting. But alas, the world unfolded as it did. And as I've seen you say many, many times, you've never seemed to have regretted that decision. So.
Yeah.
Well, tell me a bit, because related to that, actually, let's talk about the Greens, just more broadly, and we can relate it to that point in history, because there's this thing where we lump the Green Party in, and I'm gonna kind of say generally Greens at the provincial level, at the federal level, but we lump them in the progressive basket. And my impression of the Greens is it can be a bit more mixed than that, and that might be an oversimplification. What unifies Green Party members tends to be the climate focus. But tell me if you see that kind of lumping in progressivism, and whether you think it's right.
I think it's fundamentally incorrect, but I do understand that people think that. One of the things that I regret is that we lost the proportional representation vote in British Columbia, because there's an incredible opportunity right now for a Green Party, a party that actually is centrist, a party that actually recognizes that every environmental issue is not just something to scream at the clouds at and fear and despair about. It's actually an opportunity for innovation and creativity, and it actually provides a pathway to economic prosperity. And Gordon Campbell, for example, absolutely got this with his Environment Minister Barry Penner, BC Liberals. And unfortunately, what has happened often with small parties, and I guess this is no surprise, is when you get success, the kind of activists look for that success to amplify their voices. And sadly, their voices are unelectable. They're often intolerant. I don't actually like the label progressive, because frankly, the behavior of many in the so-called progressive movement is everything but progressive. It's regressive. When you have your virtues and your ideas and your ideology, and you think they are the only ones, and therefore you must implement them and others should follow, otherwise they need to be canceled. Well, that is not the way public policy advances. Christy Clark was never like that, right? She listened. She brought people together. So unfortunately, the Greens right now have just imploded and lost their way. And because what happened, it's actually quite interesting, is when one of the things that I'll never forget, I wish Geoff was here, but Geoff and John actually thanked me at one point that all the activists that were creating turmoil in their party started leaving their party and started moving towards the Greens. And all those federal liberals, those centrists, those, internalized externality kind of people who I brought to the Greens to take us to 70%, started shifting to the NDP. So by the end of 3 years, we had a bunch of members who were very activisty. And it's hard to herd those cats. And I just, I was done. I accomplished what I wanted to do, and I was done. And I had to get out. And it would have been tough for John holding those people at bay, because they're unreasonable. And you can't advance policy with unreasonable people. And so, unfortunately, the Green Party has decided to cater to unreasonable policies and conspiracy theories and kind of weird let's double down on Bonnie Henry's report on safe supply, which is like so tone deaf. I don't even know what. But so back to your question, I think right now, had the Green Party stayed in the center, they would have a real opportunity for becoming the official opposition in this election. But they will be wiped out, much like BC United, in my view. And a lot of that has to fall on the shoulders of the leader, whether it be the BC United or the BC Greens.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I reached out to you last week to come on the show, because obviously you've been out there with your latest take on BC politics. You mentioned the word authoritarian earlier, in relation to John Horgan not being one, but I think you called David Eby
by inference, yeah.
And I think you actually explicitly called him authoritarian. And you also said, the Conservatives would win the election. Suggested that, John Rustad's been a good listener, among other things you said. But I just want to give you a chance just to say, what's on your mind here? What are you thinking?
Well, I've watched the leadership of the BC NDP change dramatically since John stepped aside. Moved from one where the leader had a command of what needed to be done, had a sense of humility when mistakes were made, listened to people, empowered his ministers through delegation of authority, and really led to a lot of good governance. What has happened since then is I've watched MLA, NDP, MLA, NDP, MLA after NDP, MLA declare they're not running again. Many of the more centrist ones. I've seen policies that make no sense being advanced. That is let's just introduce safe supply without any pathway to recovery. Okay, Mr. Eby will respond, we would just put $1 billion in the budget. Well, okay, that's a little late. You want to have the pathway to recovery for, say, you can't just put more drugs on the street, which is exactly what he did. And it actually created a secondary market because, addicts would get these free safe supply, sell them to dealers, use the money to buy the regular drugs that are more powerful. And the dealers now have an excess, a cheap supply that they could sell off in Indigenous reserves across the country, across the province, or high schools or whatever. I mean, it was just crazy policy. And rather than admitting the error of his ways, he starts blaming others for when it didn't turn out. And that is not leadership. That's almost cowardice. I look at his approach to housing. Like it's like a sledgehammer seems to me that there's not actually a thoughtful process. Look, if your entire economic policy is building roads, bridges, and schools, and hospitals, which is essentially their only economic policy, how do you think you're going to have workers to build houses too, right? They're all busy building roads, building houses, schools, etc. And the issue of housing is way more complex than just build more. Like, we are a destination of choice right now. We have people across the country moving to British Columbia if they can afford it. We have, with climate change, I can assure you that British Columbia is going to be even more of a go-to destination as, Southern California dries up, Southern Europe dries up, forest fires take off everywhere. And so you got to actually think beyond let's just ban Airbnbs. Well, okay, that is kind of a sledgehammer, and there's a lot of folk hurt by that. To what are we going to do? Are we going to create some kind of social housing? It's just much more complicated, and I don't like his approach that I know best, and I'll tell you what we need to do. And I think you see that with the fact that all these ministers aren't running again. And I don't believe for a second that they all want to spend time with their children. Not for 1 second. I need,
Well, some of these guys are not spring chickens. I mean, there's a few of them there in their 70s not running again. Been there for 20 years.
I look at Rob Fleming, right? Rob Fleming, career politician. I look at Nick Simons. I had a lot of time for Nick Simons, a really good Minister of Social Development, who basically got booted when Eby stepped in. And I have no idea why. I've looked at some of his decisions of who ministers are put in where. Why was Katrine Conroy the finance minister? I mean, honestly, Selena Robinson was rock star finance minister who actually brought unbeknownst to, as some might think, oddly enough, surplus budgets to BC. And the way she was treated. I don't like the way some of these US kind of ideologies are being transported to British Columbia. Look at the school liaison officer program in BC. Yes, I blame Eby's government for this, because if he had the courage to actually stand up for what he should be doing, he should actually have introduced legislation to ensure that school boards cannot mess with the jurisdiction of police boards. But no, it's just catering to these kind of US-based this, that, and the other movements that do not, in many cases, apply to Canada. And that just, to me, strikes me as a sign of an ideologue as opposed to a leader. And I think I'm not alone, and I decided to voice that after a stint in the emergency room where I ruptured a tendon on my foot. When I was sitting there for countless hours, listening to people bemoan and complain, including NDP supporters who were campaigning for the BC Conservatives. And it was obvious to me then, if the person on the street is going to vote BC Conservative, and I have my ear to the ground in this town, an NDP town, then this is the direction we're heading.
So there's so much to tuck into, especially on the policy pieces there. And I think, the conclusion you draw about where the election's headed. But let's start. I want to say at a high level, one of the criticisms you make of David Eby is that he's an out of touch elitist. And I want to ask, as a Nobel Prize winning academic, sir, are you the guy who gets to lob that accusation? And why? Why did you decide to speak out?
All right. Anybody who knows me well knows that I am anything but an elitist. I do not hang out. I mean, I can walk in those circles, but I'm a guy
I mean,
who
look at
hangs
your
out.
shirt.
Well, yeah, look, last night, what did I do last night? I went to, I don't know whether you know the Red Lion pub in Victoria. Like, it's not like an
The Red
elitist
Lion
pub.
on Douglas.
100%. Best
Oh
place to
boy.
play darts in Victoria. So my
Okay.
buddy and I, from high school, we literally went to high school together. Went there to play darts because, and we're going to go to to next week down to the petty officers mess down in the docks to play darts with local people here. That's hardly elitist. I hang out with, my buddies who were, plumbers, and I played hockey with these guys. I'm anything but that. But yeah, I get the image might be I am. But anyone who knows me, even, you can ask the legislative press gallery, they all know me. Like, I was the guy walking around with Hawaii shirts in the legislature, right? So rugby shirts in the winter, Hawaii shirts in the summer. That's my shtick. It's because, and I feel I can talk to, that's why I literally like John Horgan, is that what you see is what you get with me. What you see is what you get with John.
You didn't always like him though. Why?
I
Why?
didn't.
Why didn't? I mean, I kind of understand how it turned
Yeah.
in that critical period, but why? Why were you averse to him before that?
Well, it's interesting. I didn't even like him in the beginning of negotiations because he clearly thought that I had Norman Spector on our team, which
Mhm.
was, I thought, if I might say so myself, Roger, a strategic coup to freak the NDP out in the negotiations. And it did exactly that. And so Horgan was not, he thought, oh, this is a waste of time. We were just going to go with the Liberals at the beginning. Uh, but what I didn't I didn't really know him. I'll be clear, is that he thought I was somebody that I wasn't, and I thought he was somebody that he wasn't. I saw him in performance in the legislature, but that really is, in question periods, it's really a fake kind of environment.
Mhm.
And I read a lot about what the media said about him. He was called Angry John. Well, I don't find him an angry person at all. He's a very down to earth, regular guy, and he thought I was elitist, just like you said, Kate. And when we like, here's what we did in the ledge above his door into the premier's office. He had a Reynolds High School banner, scarf. Above my door, I had an Oak Bay High School scarf. The kind of things we did is that when he was out one day, me and his staff switched his Reynolds and put my Oak Bay up there. This is the kind of guy he was. We the very first thing we did together, and this I just bonded with him right away, is I had a little kid in Burnaby from an elementary school. I forget her name. I probably have the email somewhere, who wrote to me this very compelling letter pleading me to come to an agreement with the NDP for all these very articulate reasons. And after we agreed, I said, John, how would you like to go to Burnaby, to this school, and talk to this student? And that was one of the first things we did. Both of us went to Burnaby.
Mhm.
We went to this kid's elementary school and we went to her class and we just engaged that class about that child's letter, trying to, show them how important it is to have your views expressed. And that to me right away told me that John and I are very similar people. Like he didn't need to do that. If you were an elitist, you wouldn't care less. But that's the first thing we did together. And it was like that all the way through. It was really one where if I had an idea, I'd say, John, this is, I got a problem with this. What do you think? He'd say, oh, okay, listen. And then he might argue back or just debate back. One of them, of course, that they were quite, I wouldn't say upset. That's the wrong word. I was intransigent on the elimination of the secret ballot for union certification. I was prepared to move if the Ontario model was followed, where you are allowed, straight certification process directly to potential unionization on construction sites, because those are highly transient sites, and that's what they do in Ontario. But BCTF didn't want that because they wanted everyone to do that. Well, okay, if you're an office worker, it's really easy to get, have a vote. Anyway, in the end, we came to an agreement. And what I liked about that, it was, and like no reporter covers this because it's all good news, is we had probably for the first time in BC history, a 100% unanimous vote for the passage of labor code changes and Employment Standards Act changes, right? That all the BC United and the BC NDP and the Greens all voted for it. And that was because, we didn't fight. We listened. He listened to me about, this is the one thing I care about because of these reasons. I met all his union folk. I met all, the union leaders, particularly the construction leaders, and I understood where they're coming from. And I even suggested, why aren't you putting this forward? Why are we? And even the reports that he would get, external reports about this, I said, why didn't you consider this? And it really came down to the BCTF, not the BCTF, BC Federation of Labor, who wanted a blanket. And anyway, that's so the long answer to your question. I got to know him.
Yeah. Well, but can we, like, if we put David Eby in a Hawaiian shirt and took him to play darts, I think you're saying even then, and you're pointing really to these policy pieces that feel out of touch. But I want to, let's pick one up, like housing, and I'll pick it up because I think that's one that really, a lot of what informs how people felt about a lot of those policies was generational. Right. Like, and I hear what you're saying about the sort of Airbnb, for example, but I'd say largely that was actually quite popular, so much so that the feds picked it up, kind of saying, this is an issue that seems to work with voters. So I want to relate this to Andrew, because I think it speaks to something of a tension that exists even within the Green Party, because you have sort of, I think, very different views of what climate policy is for kind of an older generation versus a younger generation. And part of the challenge going forward is reconciling those two things. So now I've done like a triple-barreled question for you, but let's talk about housing policy and how it cuts differently. Yeah.
I completely agree. Look, I have children who are 29 and 26, and they're out of control. Rents are unaffordable. They struggle to think of how they'll actually have a home to live in that they own. I get it. It's a really big issue. But David Eby was the housing minister from 2017 to 2020, and he brought as an advisor a former mayor of Victoria that was incredibly controversial, not only about housing policy, but about all policies, about the approach, which was sort of my way or the highway. And it struck me that what he was doing was listening to academics who, things like the speculation tax. I hated that tax. It didn't actually do what it was supposed to do. It's a bureaucratic nightmare. It was a matter of confidence, and so I modified it by saying I don't care, right? We have to change this to temper it. But that's just crazy policy. Like, what we were pushing for and what the Fed finally did is saying, like, you don't put this ridiculous bureaucratic nightmare that some academic dreamed up in some paper they published. If you care, you do what others have done. Like, we're not the only jurisdiction in the world. In places like Australia and New Zealand, foreign ownership cannot happen on secondary properties. You can have foreign ownership in new construction, but not secondary properties. Why did we not just do that? Why do we think it's okay for someone from Australia to buy a home in BC and just leave it alone, whereas we can't go to Australia and buy a home and do the same? So it was real. There were things that could have been done, but again, he didn't listen. It never listened. ICBC, I come back to the ICBC policy, with the no-fault insurance. You can go back on my website. Right at one of the questions I asked him at QP right early on was, why have you said that you're going to eliminate any possibility of going to no fault? Instead, he came up with this ideological limit soft tissue damage to $20,000, which was just ridiculous. And eventually he went to no fault insurance. Again, he didn't listen to me. He didn't listen to other advisors he had, because he knows best. And it was like this on many issues. Now he can change, of course. But coming back to the darts, he would just be awkward in that situation. He would just be that awkward guy. Like, I couldn't imagine playing darts with him. Like, it would just be weird. I can imagine playing.
You'd have a big reach.
Well, he'd just go and put it in with his hand.
Right? Just reach and put it right to the bullseye.
Yeah. Well, I could play darts with John Horgan.
So, I mean, you served for 7 years in the legislature with David Eby. Yeah. You served for 7 years in the legislature with John Rustad.
Yeah.
So in terms of where you're at today, in terms of your analysis on these things, does your personal history with them play into that in terms of what you observed sitting across or alongside them?
It does. Obviously, you get to know MLAs really well, and you made a point earlier, Mike, that I always tried to work across the aisle. When I was the Alone Green, I worked very closely with Christy Clark and Andrew Wilkinson at the time, Advanced Ed. I had a number of my bills passed. They would pass in the name of the Liberals. Sexualized Violence and Misconduct Policy Act was one that was passed because, and so. I got to know many of the ministers. I got to know John at the time. He was the Minister of Indigenous Affairs, or I forget that it had a different name back then.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah. And again, I was at a UIBC chiefs event with him in Musqueam Territory and saw him there, chatted with him. He was somebody I could talk to. I recognize that his views on some issues are very different from mine. He did stand up and support and vote for all of Campbell's climate policies, which were incredibly visionary. So it tells me that, given that I knew that Campbell also allowed some dissent, not a lot, but some dissent in his that there's a man who could listen. I met with him several times in recent months too, to learn more, and he listens. And it's not that I have all the ideas, but when you go into a conversation with somebody, it's not you listening and them just diatribing at you what you need to do. It's about them talking, you talking, and coming to some consensus. He can do that.
So I mean, this is a fascinating conversation because I think, your comments in the past week have probably caused some heads to explode.
Well, I've heard that.
Yeah, and I don't know if your academic background helps assist you in dealing with head explosions. But it's
oh God, you have no idea what it's like to work at a university.
But just to summarize things neatly here is that some observers would say that David Eby has actually put more focus on climate measures than John Horgan, that he's pushing the envelope further on Clean BC, that Kevin Falcon fired John Rustad from caucus because he felt John Rustad was not acknowledging climate change and was questioning aspects of it. And then there's the carbon tax. I'm interested in where you fall in that too. And John Rustad's taken a very Poilievrean view of the carbon tax, and BC United is somewhere not where they used to be, but somewhere in the middle. And then the NDP are like, there's only one premier in Canada who is offering a full-throated defense of the carbon tax, and that's David Eby. So within that little summary, I'm trying to unpack that with you. How do you navigate through that?
Unexplode some heads. Unexplode some heads, please.
Yeah, or explode more.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to start with a famous Henry Kissinger quote that the politics in the university is so vicious because the stakes are so low, and that is so absolutely true. So yeah, I can handle the university because it just like far too many people take themselves far too seriously and think others actually care what their views are when actually they don't. But that's there. I just caused a bunch of it.
That's the next heads on. Yeah.
Excuse me, I'm just getting over COVID. With the carbon tax, Mr. Rustak can say whatever he wants about the carbon tax, and he has been saying quite vehemently he's going to axe it. Well, he can't because it's under federal jurisdiction right now. And so if he were to axe the way BC is doing it, all that would happen is the model that is now implemented in Alberta would apply. And in fact, for the average British Columbian, they might be better off because what has happened with the BC NDP is that rather than following on the pathway that Carol James and John Horgan and I negotiated, which was moving slightly away from revenue neutrality, but with the firm commitment that that slight movement away from revenue neutrality was to create some capital for the investment of infrastructure for example, EV chargers, heat pumps, etc. So a little bit. Now, what has happened with Eby, of course, and as Trudeau's carbon tax is going up $15 a month, the average person is not getting back anything near what they should be getting back, and it's just turned into general revenue. Well, that was never its intent. It was revenue neutral under Gordon Campbell. it's remained. Obviously, we started to get some weird boutique tax credits as part of the revenue neutrality. My favorite was the hockey stick credit. Most British Columbians didn't know that if you bought your kid a hockey stick, you'd have a $12 tax credit on your income tax return. And so, I get all that stuff, which is great because nobody claims it, and the money's still in the bank for the province. The budget looks good, but EB just went away from it, and so he does talk about. I mean, there's no question. Clean BC is something I'm very proud of, and a lot of the NDP economic plan under John Horgan was essentially my plan, which was one grounded in innovation. Created the NBC Fund, focus on the Clean Emerging Autonomy Task Force, the Innovation Commission, et cetera, to try to recognize that every environmental issue is actually an opportunity for innovation, and we should be actually promoting that rather than subsidizing industries of the past. Again, the problem with EB right now is that, again, I look around and I look at the average person on the street, and I see an obvious victory for the BC Conservatives because of not EB's climate policy, but because of all the other policies that he's done. And so, in my view, it's far better to be able to influence those who may think that climate change is some kind of left-wing issue, to try to get them to understand that it's not. It's actually dealing with climate change is actually an economic issue. And if you look at the greatest leaders who've advanced climate policies in the world, I'm going to name them off, starting with Margaret Thatcher, Conservative Prime Minister in the UK, set up the Hadley Centre, instrumental in the formation of international negotiating efforts. Angela Merkel in Germany, a Conservative leader in Germany. Gordon Campbell in British Columbia. Well, he was BC Liberal, but nobody would call Liberal. BC politics. Names don't mean anything. And Arnold Schwarzenegger in California, another Republican. So the problem with climate change policy, frankly, it has been politicized, and it's now become perceived as a left-wing issue, when frankly it's not. And I blame actually Al Gore for that. Because of the fact that he was a few hanging chads away from becoming the president of the US, and then decided to go all in, advancing the importance of dealing with climate change. Good on him, effective spokesperson. One of the unfortunate consequences of that is it polarized the US debate into now climate change is a Democrat issue, not a Republican issue. And that's permeated up to Canada. Look, 80% of Canadians believe climate change is a serious issue and want policy to move forward. I don't think any political party should be elected to govern if they do not treat this very serious issue with the kind of kid gloves that it needs treated. And I think I'm seeing Rustad, through my conversations, shift, and his language is shifting. He's got a long way to go, but I think he's been talking to the wrong people. So when you talk to people who, if you're within your echo chamber, of course your views are validated. If you use social media, the AI is just giving you confirmation bias with article after article. If you talk to others and you have a conversation because you're willing to listen, then you can actually advance. Look, I've compared John Rustad to John Horgan. You're absolutely right. John Horgan came initially somewhat kicking and screaming to the advance of climate policy. Then he realized what an opportunity it was for an economic policy, and he went all in. So this is why I feel that Rustad, he will change things. He has pointed out things like this outrageous Clean BC granting mechanism, whereas if you get me to write the grant, you have a better probability of getting the grant. Like this kind of stuff, cronyism cannot happen, and it turns off everybody. And so again,
John Rustad's he's a big, and the Conservatives are big supporters of liquefied natural gas. And you've, this goes back 10 years, and when you were in there, and you were a skeptic of the LNG. Okay, so what would your message to John Rustad be on LNG? Because I mean, since in the last year or so, we've had FIDs on Cedar LNG. LNG Canada's first cargo is going to happen within the next year sometime. Wood fiber's under construction. Tilbury just got federal approval. And there's potentially more coming, right? There's at least more proposals coming. So the issues evolved over the last decade, but what would your advice be now on that?
The issue that I raised in 2012 and 2013 in that campaign, when Christy Clark threw a Hail Mary pass in an election where she was 20 points behind and came from nowhere to win. You know, Adrian Dix was on the front page of the Province saying this man could kick a dog and he'd still be premier. It was never economical in BC. It just simply was not economical without outrageous government subsidies. And that is the only reason why LNG Canada is here, is because of subsidy after subsidy, steel tax exemptions, elimination of the requirement to use clean energy, allowing the construction offshore to bring it in on tideline. Those jobs weren't actually being given to British Columbians. In terms of deep well credits, which the NDP finally removed, it was subsidy after subsidy after subsidy. And so I called it a pipe dream. And I was asked recently by a reporter, do you still think it's a pipe dream? And I said, yes, of course I do. And he said, well, it's happening. And I said, yeah, sure. It is a pipe dream for me to look at a house in Shaughnessy in Vancouver or Uplands here and think I'm going to own it one day. That's a pipe dream. But if the government comes along and writes me a check for $5 million and says, now do you want to buy it? I'd say, yeah, I can buy it. So it's not a pipe dream. And that's what's happened in LNG. And that's what happens when you have governments who are picking winners and losers in the private sector, that rather than creating a regulatory environment that is actually fair and forces companies to internalize the externalities of their behavior. You know, you shouldn't be getting subsidized electricity. You shouldn't be getting, I mean, this is not right. And in my conversations with Rustad, I would say there's a lot of where we agree is I'm all for speeding up environmental permitting on various things. You know, nothing gets done in BC because our whole process is one of red tape. But that doesn't mean that you should subsidize. It doesn't mean you should be handing out cash that is public money. And so we agree on a lot of that. So, I with my LNG statements all through, you can go all the way through my legislation. It was all about government handouts, generational sellouts, with respect to the money that government was essentially giving to a multinational to not even ship BC gas. This is the irony, right? Because there's no requirement that you have to ship BC gas. So conventional gas from Alberta is likely going to be shipped. So again,
well, I think most of the natural gas development is in the Montney.
Yeah, but that's not even
okay.
But that's not even the Montney. That is not being done for natural gas. It's being done for the value in the liquids, because it is the liquids that have the value, because we have a glut of natural gas in the North American market. And so, you know, if there were not liquids, I mean, the Horn River Basin is completely dead, and that's because that's dry. Those are dry wells. There's no liquids there.
So to be clear, you're saying that it really is, you know, thinking of LNG, like it's the investment, not to the carbon emissions related to it. Like that's the thing you're reacting to. To pick that up, because I think, you know, I hear the case you're making basically about John Rustad, right? Like, and you're saying, and it kind of pulls together a bunch of things you said in this conversation, right? That basically John Rustad's someone who will listen, and in these conversations you feel like there's an opportunity to influence him.
Yeah.
Well, let's pull that together with the point you made about economic policy and the lack thereof. You're underscoring with the EB government and saying it's all, you know, public sector jobs.
Yeah.
So because I'm going to say John Rustad's going to be looking pretty quickly at the resource sector, I think, outside of that. Like, so where do you see opportunity there to convince him in a way that aligns to climate objectives?
Incredible opportunity, because look, anybody who thinks we don't need minerals is really just dreaming. We need minerals. We have great deposits all across British Columbia, but it doesn't mean we have to have zero standards in mining them. So I look to the regulatory environment the government can set to say, okay, you know, let's internalize the externalities a little bit. We can, you know, we have buttons with switches, knobs, etc. We can adjust policy a little bit. I'll come to the mining with a specific example. There's a company in Vancouver, UBC, called MineSense, who developed technology, which is in essence assays in the bucket. What I mean by that is when the bucket's clawing the rock at the rock face, in the actual load in that bucket, they can determine through whatever technology if it's economical or not to mine to ship to the crusher. The crushers and rock processing facility may be many miles away. So you're going to drive them a long way in diesel trucks. You're going to start to use a lot of water in the crushing, but you're going to have kaolin ponds. That technology right off the bat is hugely beneficial both for the company and the environment because it leaves the pristine rock at the rock face side for reclamation later. It saves all the diesel to take it to the crusher. It saves the water use that's being used in the extraction process, and it's win for everybody. But let's look at forestry. It's the same thing in forestry. Why do we think that we have to only focus on cutting down trees? There's so much value-added potential, like we have with cellulite fiber, being able to produce sustainable aviation fuels. The Portland refinery is beginning to move down that direction. Why are we burning slash? Why aren't we utilizing that to create sustainable aviation fuels? Let's look at the city of Terrace. This is like an incredible opportunity that BC is missing. Terrace is in rural BC, boom and bust economies associated with the resource development. But what it has, strategic opportunity, is it's on a rail line between Chicago and Prince Rupert. Prince Rupert, deep port closest to Asia. Chicago, gateway to Eastern US. Why aren't we recognizing that there are companies around the world that want to brand themselves as clean in the manufacturing process? And we in British Columbia have ample clean energy. What an opportunity for growing our clean energy sector to actually create opportunities to, as they do in other jurisdictions, in the new economy, to encourage a manufacturing sector in and around that area to stabilize the kind of economic bust and boom cycles of the resource sector. The forestry, we have not only cellulite, we have engineered wood products, Structurlam in Okanagan Falls, a great company, BC-based company, making wood products that can replace steel and concrete in many constructions. UBC Gauge Tower replacement, 18-story building made largely of wood, obviously not the elevator shaft, but yeah, you see these buildings going up everywhere. You see these weird kind of elevator shafts going up, and then the building happens around them. So this is the way of the future, and British Columbia has the opportunity to lead like no one else because we have the best and beautiful place to live in the world, so we can attract and retain the best and brightest. Our education system is time after time ranked at the very top in international efforts, so we can provide really smart and skilled workers. And look where at our environment, we have boundless access to energy, to water, renewable energy, to water, to fiber, to minerals. Why aren't we actually capitalizing on our strategic strengths rather than just, let's do me too, let's try to ship natural gas and oil to jurisdictions that when there's so much natural gas in the world and people are moving away from it.
And is this the type of conversation you're having with John Rustad? Like, is that
that's exactly the conversation I'm having with him.
Well, then let me take it a step further and say, because, and John Russ, it's a growing but small party, the BC Conservatives, right? And we're at 4 now, 4 held seats, and a bunch of candidates though that are getting a lot of attention for some pretty far right views, and in a space politically often where climate change gets treated as a conspiracy he's not that far from, and some of the candidates, I'm going to say maybe there's not a lot of distance with climate doubters, climate change doubters. And so while I hear you that you're having these good conversations with John Rustad, is it maybe worth a bit of skepticism that would translate, were the Conservatives to foreign government, into them embracing climate policies?
Well, one of the things that I have asked, I have raised this question directly with him, obviously, because, you don't want people who think weird things about vaccination, making healthcare policy. You don't want, so I would suggest that they have revetted all of their candidates, and a couple of them are no longer running. There's no doubt that there are some who have more, I would actually say ill-informed views on climate. I mean, as opposed to, ill-informed is a word that I like to say, because what I see him reacting to and some of these other people reacting to is it's not so much the climate policy, it's the Extinction Rebellion type folk. It's the radical people who, want to shut down highways and stuff. And people who are screaming from the rafters, it's a crisis, it's an emergency. As soon as you use language like crisis and emergency, you create fear. And when you create fear, you have one of two reactions. One is despondency, ignoring they're crazy, I'm going to ignore them and find information to validate my opinion. Or this kind of, oh my God, I'm all worried. And so we have in our society a large amount of youth who are struggling with climate anxiety. And a lot of that is a direct consequence of the messaging coming out from alarmists. And I fought against that my entire life. Look, I've been a climate scientist since 1985. I've spent my entire career in this area. I know exactly, I haven't changed my views on this ever. And I've worked with various governments across the political spectrum. And the time and time again, more often than not, it is the reaction of the extremists that creates this counter reaction. And so what is more helpful is if you can actually get in a conversation where you're not screaming and shouting, but you're actually having a normal conversation, answering questions, then you can actually change people's minds if you're willing to listen. John Horgan was willing to listen. I believe John Rustad's a listener. And I don't think David Eby's a listener. He can change and become a listener, but certainly right now, every indication is he surrounds himself with sycophants and basically runs the province out of his office and through his appointed advisors, some of whom have, very little qualifications in my view to actually be making the advice that they're making. It's just, but they'll agree with his views. And that is dangerous. That is not governance. That is advancing an ideology without listening to people. And that is what I'm reacting to, because that needs to change, in my view.
Dr. Weaver, you and I were chatting about this yesterday. The last BC Conservative elected to the BC legislature was in the 1978 by-election.
Vic Stevens,
who was defeated the next year by Brian Smith.
Yeah.
So there hasn't been a Conservative elected in over 45 years. Obviously, that happens to be your riding. Do you think the BC Conservatives can win in Oak Bay Gordon Head next election? And who might the candidate be for the Conservatives?
So the answer is yes, I do, depending on the candidate. The reason why I say that is Oak Bay Gordon Head has a long, if you go and look at demographics, it's one of the ridings where there's a ton of civil servants who live here, a ton of people retire here from other parts of the country, a lot of very educated people who really spend a lot of time thinking about who they're going to vote for. We typically have the highest or second highest voter turnout in the province every election. And this riding always votes for the person over the party. And I say that because you just have to look at the last three people who held this riding. Ida Chong, BC Liberal, for, I don't know, it was quite a number of years. 17 years, right? And she was a good friend. And then, I phoned her up before anyone knew I was going to run, because I thought that's the honorable thing to do. Right after that, it was me, Green, like never elected a Green anywhere. And right after that, it was Marie Rankin, NDP. And actually, before Vic Stevens, it was Scott Wallace, Dr. Scott Wallace, who was a Conservative for, I think, 2 terms. He was a SOCRED originally and then switched over. And so
before that, it was a Liberal. So there
you go. Yeah, right. So I didn't even know. I don't remember the history before that. But so yes, I know one person who has submitted their nomination papers. It's not for me to announce that person's name, and it is not me, and I am not running in this election. Just let's be very clear about that. I believe I know another one.
Are you sure? Are you sure you're not running?
For the record now.
You seem to have a lot to say.
So I am really enjoying advising. It's well, you would know that, Mike. That's been your role for a long time.
I'm a chicken. I've never run except for student council.
Okay, how did it go? Clearly not well, because he never ran for anything.
I was elected.
That was awkward. Oh, you were elected. Okay.
I was elected 3 times. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Then I retired.
So the reason why I've been vocal about this is I do care deeply about the climate policy that we put in place in BC. And I really care that Mr. Rustad understand where it came from and what's underlying it rather than dismiss it. I'm not fussed about any individual policy, but I do believe that we have an opportunity here. and I think I have a responsibility to convey that to whoever is willing to listen, because I have agency in that particular field. I don't think I could even talk. Like Evie, I know from work, you can't. He doesn't listen, so there's no point me even trying with him. But John listens, and John Horgan listens, and that to me, and there's others in the NDP who listen, but unfortunately many of them are gone, and so I'm just doing what I can to ensure that because I think it really is a when, Mr. Rustad wins the next election, that he does so and governs more towards the center where people are. 60% of British Columbians are in that middle region. They're not like in the far extreme right or the far extreme left. That's where all the noise is. But you govern for the collective, and that has always been my concern. And so that is why and frankly, I can't afford a 50% salary cut at my age again. I did that once before. Like for some, politics is the best gig.
But you get adds to your MLA pension though.
Oh, I can't because I have to I didn't think I'd ever do this again, and I'm not. So I'm drawing down on that. Like it's nothing. It's a small amount, and you can't add to it. So I wouldn't be eligible for an MLA pension, and it's not as good as my UVic pension anyway. And so why on earth would I do that to take abuse? Why does anyone
do it? Why does anyone do it?
Because they feel a sense of, for some people it's the best gig they're ever going to get in their life. Like if you're a barista and suddenly you're an MLA, like this is the best gig you're ever going to get. If you're the CEO of some major corporation, this is not a good gig for you financially. You do it out of a sense of calling. I mean, I look at. There are people in that place that I have enormous respect for. Michael Lee is one with BC United. Enormous respect for him. Sad he's not running. Well, he's probably waiting for the party to implode and then he'll arise and rebuild it, but something like that. I look at, poor Heyman is a bit long in the tooth. But there are, I mean, lots of good people. And Mike Bernier, we also mentioned BC United. I really would like him to win. I think he was a super education minister. He really dealt with some very difficult issues. But anyway, I think we need more reasonable people for whom politics isn't a career choice. It's a sense of civic duty. You get in, you get out, and let someone else get in and get out. And anyway.
Well,
that's just me.
Well, this has been a very fascinating, spirited discussion, and I appreciate your candor and your hot takes.
Well, I'm not elite. See, what you see is what you get from me, Mike. Like, I'm going to tell you what I think.
We're going to have you back, I think. We'll see what the ratings are like first.
I'll wear a different Hawaii shirt, though.
I'll wear my Hawaii shirt and my black gloves.
I did not strangle the Greens. They made choices, and their choice was, hey, I think there's some space to the left of the NDP as David Eby shifts to the far left. I'm not so sure there's much space there. They did that to themselves. That's nothing to do with me. I was kicking and screaming trying to bring them to the center.
Well, thanks for coming for a stay here at the Hotel Pacifico, and we'd love to have you back soon.
Did I get my little chocolate on the side of my sheets before I sign off?
Yeah, unfortunately, we left them in the sun. It's 29 degrees. It's climate change. They melted.
They melted. Guess. Last week, we spoke about connectivity and how presenting sponsor TELUS is helping to close the connectivity gap by working to bring high-speed internet to every household in Canada, including in BC. We are very close. 95.2% of households in BC have access to high-speed internet. To that end, TELUS recently helped an additional 800 households in 5 communities on Vancouver Island gain access to high-speed broadband internet, unlocking better, faster access to digital services and opportunities. New connectivity infrastructure is being installed at Quetzino Subdivision 18 of the Quetzino First Nation, Cole Harbour, Sprout Lake, Forbidden Plateau, and Ross Road, including homes along approximately 2.3 kilometers of the Island Highway and Nanu's Bay. The Government of British Columbia has invested $2.6 million through the Connecting British Columbia program, administered by the Northern Development Initiative Trust. TELUS contributed more than $2.6 million alongside $37,500 from the Regional District of Mount Waddington. This project will allow residents to stay connected, support their local communities, and access resources they need from the comfort of their own homes. And it's just another way TELUS comes to the plate again and again as BC's hometown team.
Hello. You've reached the Hotel Pacifico Strategy Suite.
Well, welcome to the Strategy Suite. We've got a different lineup here today, but we're happy to welcome BC Bob Kronbauer to the Strategy Suite. Bob, welcome.
Celebrity visitor.
Oh, thank you. I'll take it.
Bob, tell us what you're up to these days.
I'm up to traveling the province. I'm telling stories. I'm offering little-known bits of trivia packaged up into reels and TikToks, pretty much.
And last time I checked, you have a combined followership of about 200,000 between TikTok and Instagram. So I'm assuming
209,000, but who's counting?
Who's counting? So I'm expecting we're going to go through the roof on our ratings this week. It's going to be awesome.
Well, if we can keep this to 30 seconds, the entire podcast to 30 seconds, we'll be fine.
Okay, we're already blown through that. Geoff, you're in between sailing trips, or you're on the water a lot this
I'm
week?
in the midst of one in the Southern Gulf Islands, but so I just want to say, Bob, we're having you on because you know so much, not because you have a lot of followers. Just want to clear that up right there.
No, we want them for the followers. Actually,
it's because we love you. I'm on a very nice trip, and I'm surprised and shocked to hear that it's pouring rain and flooding apparently in Ontario. There's different weather events there, but not here. Not here.
So just a little tiny bit of business here. We've had a couple of reviews lately. 5-star review came in last week from quote unquote a big fan who says they're hooked and it's a perfectly balanced perspective on the BC political scene. So thank you, big fan, for that. We also had a review from Yukon Scott, who I won't read the whole thing, but Yukon Scott was a little less impressed and is concerned that we do not have enough jousting banter and no clever, witty, slicing arguments, and worst of all, no swearing. Thanks, Yukon Scott, for your review. Go fuck yourself. So now on to...
What about... I guess he has...
Not that we're sensitive, but if you want swearing, I'll direct it at you. There you go.
He should listen to the Glenn Clark interview. There was jousting banter there. Bring him back.
Yes, there was. And thank you for bringing up Glenn Clark. We try to do that once a show. Now let's get on to the Strategy Suite. Now, obviously, not technically BC politics per se, but how can we ignore what happened in the U.S. last weekend with the attempted assassination of former President Trump? Geoff, where were you when you heard the news?
Well, I heard it late because I was in a place where cell coverage doesn't penetrate on Galiano Island, not down in Montague Harbor. It didn't penetrate for me anyway. So I found out after the fact, but it was really shocking, of course, particularly because it was such a close call, an unbelievably close call. And now the huge paradox that ostensibly a 20-year-old outsmarted the security preparations of the biggest of some of the most sophisticated power in the world, really. And it's a real wake-up call for people, but also it shows how tough it is for people in politics because these risks are real. And of course, nobody wishes any harm to Trump in a physical way. Maybe people wish he was somewhere else politically. But as you know, because you worked with a premier and I did because I did as well, security is a real concern, and it's a live one, and it's a 24/7 problem for people. And the requirements of security are directly contrary to how open any thinking politician would like to be to the public and be out in the world.
Yeah, I mean, the Premier's police detail, who you and I are both familiar with, it's tough to go through the mundanity of the schedule a lot when nothing really seems to happen. And you got to be just ready for that moment that if something does happen, you got to be there. Got to be so active.
I know of two real-time events which show the contrast. One was I was contacted by the head of the security detail to say that they'd received a threat which they believed was actionable. And they would tell me more soon, but the premier wasn't in any danger. And about 4 hours later, they told me that they'd traced the threat, which I think was an online threat of some kind, to an elderly, confused man in Calgary who was really shaken up to have some Mounties arrive at his door and ask what he was thinking when he wrote that message. So that was not a threat, fortunately, in the real sense. But another occasion where the premier's schedule got a bit scrambled, he went into a restaurant and was given a table at the back for the party that was there. Quite a large group was with him. You know, when you have a couple of people from the political staff and 2 or 3 members of the detail and a member of the local community, and was trapped there when some people angry about vaccine measures came in and confronted him. And there was no obvious way to go, and the police had to, speak to this one individual very, very firmly. And it was an upsetting event for everybody in the restaurant, shouting, police, that kind of stuff. And no one's really clear on where this might go. So, you want to be out in the world, but you never know. You could be sitting at with a Mountie next to you at the terminal at YVR, and someone will come up and give you a piece of their mind, and the next person will be a lovely person with an issue they want to canvass with you. So it's hard.
Yeah. So Bob, what about you on the Trump stuff? I mean, you lived in the States for a while as well. I'm curious.
Yeah, I was there. I was there during 9/11, and the difference between then and now in terms of media, I heard on the radio, I was listening to NPR as I got onto the 405 freeway, the second plane has hit the tower. That's how we all heard about it. This time, I mean, obviously, I'm not going to compare 9/11 to Trump almost being shot. It was a huge event, but the way I found out about it, I was also in the car, and my wife is on Instagram, and she's like, "Oh, hey, somebody shot at Trump." And I was like, what the heck? We're finding out this information through Instagram and through all these other platforms. And it's just a wild, the environment when it comes to the way that we're getting stories and the way that we're learning more about these events or not learning about what's actually happening.
From a million different perspectives, including conspiracy theories. And I think there was both a kind of from one anti-Trump perspective, there were all sorts of theories that this was staged. On the other hand, on the other side of the spectrum, it's like Biden was behind it. I mean, it's a lot of scary stuff, a lot of, stuff that you wonder where it's going to lead to, right?
Well, there's always a tendency to make these things into massive, globally connected and networked conspiracies. But the trouble for the police is that it may just be a disturbed old man in Calgary. And they can never make a determination until they've had a chance to investigate it and track it to ground. And I think in our conversation before the show, Mike, you were reminding us that this is not something that's foreign to BC or to Canada, because there was the deaths on Parliament Hill. There was that weird one in Victoria with the which turned out to be a bit of a fiasco from a Mountie investigation perspective, with the alleged kettle bomb installed in the garden right outside the premier's office, which has bulletproof glass, but not much more protection than that.
Well, yeah, and I think we're a bit complacent and naive here in Canada to think that this is an American phenomenon. I went just back to refresh my memory. Like 1984, gunman goes in the Quebec National Assembly, kills 3 people, wounds 13 people. Was looking to kill Premier René Lévesque. I look at 2012, they had another attempt at it, or they had someone killed at a Parti Québécois election night celebration, and that gunman was looking to kill politicians. You had you mentioned the 2014 gunman kills the military officer protecting the War Memorial, and then goes to Parliament Hill, and the Conservative Prime Minister Stephen Harper is behind a door as the gunman's outside, and killed by the sergeant at arms. Just crazy stuff, right? And finally, in 2020, there was a guy trying to get access to Prime Minister Trudeau's property, and arrested. He tried to drive through the gates and arrested with guns and all that stuff. So it's like, wow, we're lucky. We're lucky we haven't had something much more serious happen here. It's not just an American thing.
But we have an expert with us on the social media front, and so Bob, I'd be curious in your reaction to this, because it's become kind of accepted that legacy media are kind of irrelevant. Op-ed page articles in the Vancouver Sun are not going to move the vote. Big events are not. we had a pandemic election, which was mostly done online or virtually. Door knocking declined. It's going to be a social media campaign. With the combination of security concerns and the importance of social media, do you think this is going to be basically overwhelmingly a TikTok, Instagram kind of fight coming up in the fall?
I think so. Yeah. Look at what Polyev has already done in the time leading up to it. He's completely circumvented any normal way that you would get the vote out or get the message out, and seems to be converting people that you might not otherwise think would have voted for him based on, weird social media strategy.
Is it possible to say that if I spend enough money, I will convert this many potential supporters to supporters? Is there any kind of metrics like that? I mean, in the old days, people used to say, well, we'll buy so many gross rating points of audience. We got this kind of money, we'll throw it on the scale. This is how many people will see the impressions, and we think we're going to convert some share of that group to vote for us. Is there anything like that in social media? Can you tell?
Yeah, most certainly. Yeah, you could tell how many people saw it, but I guess it depends on how you still have to employ those tactics of classic politics, where it's like, I got to strike a nerve. I have to, jump on something while it's hot and show that my opponent is not the worthy candidate that I am, or it is hard to track. I don't know how you guys do it traditionally, like track conversions, and the way things are going. People in the States more so.
We have a big, we have an Excel spreadsheet, and no one volunteers. I don't know. It's an important
you go
question.
to the door, you make a phone call. Yeah, you write it on the list. Somebody takes the paper, puts it in the computer.
Who do you think
you do have memberships, right? You could track memberships. So you could, in theory, stink $1 million into an Instagram campaign, put a UTM tracking code on it to your sign up page, which then tracks me, the user, through my journey to when I finally donate $10 to your party and become a member. You could do that a lot easier than you could do that based on a bunch of TV appearances or op-eds.
Can you handicap the current leaders for their social media presence?
Me personally?
Yeah. Why don't you? I mean, come on.
I used to write politics.
209,000.
Okay, we'll throw some
followers.
names at you. So you mentioned Polyev. He's got a strong digital game for sure.
Yeah.
But what about BC? What do you see out of David Eby?
What do I see on David Eby?
Like online. Like, do you think he's got a strong presence online?
No. I follow him personally because I'm interested in politics, and he's the premier, so I see his stuff. But that's the only time I ever see it. I don't see anybody talking about him. I don't see anybody there's and I said this before, going back to 5-star reviews, there's not that much out there when it comes to BC politics aside from this podcast. And I'm not just trying to float you guys' boats here, but there's not much going on in terms of this type of content on social media right now that people actually care about.
Mm-hmm. Well, does anyone in BC stand out for you as an interesting voice that in the political realm that catches your attention, that is doing stuff online? What about our good old friend Brad West?
I liked him when he was on your podcast, but that's the last time I saw him.
He doesn't really push much out digitally, actually.
Okay. And it's less leaders and it's more just people, business owners. There's this guy named Potato Ty out in the valley, and the local First Nation, I can't remember what nation it is, Mike, you might know. The federal government is looking to give back some land to the First Nation that is happened to be leased by this potato farmer right now. And so he's stuck between, supporting reconciliation, which he says he does, and saying, hey, this is better off served this land as my farm than giving it to the First Nation. And he's got, I don't know, 800,000 followers or something, because he makes really interesting content. It's usually about potato farming. It's generally about potato farming, and he makes funny jokes, and he's a handsome guy, and he's trying to move the needle on his own without the help of any political party, it seems.
The last time I remember something really explode was the Merritt guy who built an electric logging truck. He already had a huge audience, right?
A similar situation with this Potato Tie guy is yeah, those guys made a bunch of noise, and it ended up getting traction.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I don't see any of the leaders. I don't see MLAs. I don't see, interesting content being produced
One
about
guy who's
politics.
made an impact in the political realm with a strong digital presence is Aaron Gunn, who,
Yeah, that's true.
Canadian Taxpayer Federation, then he did his own thing, and now he's running for the federal Conservatives on the North Island. He used to brag, or at least maybe it's a legitimate claim, I guess, that he had more followers than John Horgan, more followers than any politician in British
It was
Columbia.
true. It was true.
Yeah.
And he did it on the basis of journalism, like whether, and I'm not quarreling that it was journalism, like others would say it was not. However, he did these investigative pieces that really struck a chord.
Mm-hmm.
But he brought that equity to the table. And it was one of the strange decisions that, in retrospect, made by the Kevin Falcon, then BC Liberals, to vet him out as a potential leadership candidate, because one of the strengths he brought to the table was a big social media following. And I think that may have been, oddly enough, what scared them, because he already had a defined brand that they didn't think was perhaps aligned with what they wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Mike, to your question earlier, can I move the needle, or was that Geoff? Can I move the leader on some of this stuff? I would be surprised if you didn't see more influencers or content creators being tapped by parties leading up to the election to piggyback on what they're doing. I will not be one of them. I'm out of politics. I used to write politics columns. The spiciest one was when Andrew Weaver first got his strangling gloves on to murder the Green Party, and that.
I think
I'm not in that space anymore. I don't write politics columns,
Geoff
and I'm nonpartisan as well.
Geoff went down to Winners to buy him some black gloves.
Nice.
I think.
Nice.
But we're fairly far, but not that far from where we started, which was violence, which is another reason that people have an excellent reason why a politician would prefer to be more controlled, as they can be in a social media setting. But ironically, they need to be out in the world doing the social media. They have to be doing it somewhat spontaneously. I'm sure what your product, Bob, is straight to camera kind of thing. It's Bob Kronbauer telling you what he's just seen with some enthusiasm and interest, and that's not something that every politician can do naturally, I think.
And the spike in all this is that anybody can. And so, as opposed to somebody writing an op-ed saying, don't vote for this guy, now you've got 1 million people out here that have 1 million followers that could say, I think this person is an idiot, and don't vote for them. And you already trust me because, I'm talking to you on your phone every day. The bar is so much lower for entry for people to disrupt the space, I think.
Mm-hmm. Well, one social media post that did get a lot of amplification over the weekend, going back to the whole Trump situation, was this UBC medical professor who ill-advisedly, in my opinion, tweeted out kind of, oh, too bad the shooter missed. I think I'm paraphrasing that.
This could have been a great day or something like that.
Yeah, and this medical professor is getting canceled hard online by people who take offense to that. I mean, in fact, all three of the major political leaders have weighed in on it and said she shouldn't have done it, but it was a bad idea. It's created a reputational issue for UBC because it's not the kind of attention I think an institution wants to attract, to have one of their people they're associated with, professor in the School of Medicine, drawing fire from thousands and thousands of retweets or reposts, probably tens of thousands by this point. So that's cautionary tale for people. You think you're just having speaking to a small audience of people that follow you, and all of a sudden your life gets upended by something that goes very viral very quickly. Did you happen to see that, Bob? Did you catch the coverage?
I did see that. And what struck me about it was something that's in 1 million group chats right now, in 1 million text messages, maybe not as harsh as that. I don't know that anybody is celebrating someone getting shot or wishing death upon a candidate, which is crazy. But there's so much. There was, after the initial announcement and all the news came out and everything, there were so many memes that were just, whoa, I just wild memes. And I think that people get caught up in it's just for show, and it's just, it's almost like entertainment because it's not our politics and it's just on the screen. It seems like a really simple thing to not do, like we learned this 10 years ago when we first got on social media. It
Digital
boggles my
trail.
mind. Yeah, but it's when everything
she
is
canceled
that
her
you
accounts, and and that doesn't matter. It was screen grabbed, and that will live in him forever, right? And
yeah, I mean, I don't imagine that they're not talking to them right now. Like what's the next announcement? I think it's still the top story on CBC BC today.
yeah,
It was on radio all day yesterday up until the evening.
Yeah, so that's
Well,
a
these
big.
there's a trajectory to a lot of these things too, and I was thinking about this topic about when I recalled the whole outbreak of the Hamas attacks on Israel triggered one huge reaction for a period of time, and then subsequently, Selena Robinson wound up leaving the NDP caucus in part because of tweets that she had made during that period, which were offensive to some members of the community, very supported by other members of the community. To a large degree, the entire debate about anti-Semitism has fought itself out over whether or not the reactions of people here in BC to the events in the Middle East and the attacks on Israel are appropriate. And that means that anybody getting into politics now who's going to try to have a social media presence have a hard time creating it on their own, especially if they're now suddenly a nominee for a campaign which does not want to be spending even 1 second trying to put to bed some issue about a tweet from the past and especially in the present. And I think that's going to be a really interesting challenge because on the one hand, they really have to up their game, as you're saying, Bob, and put money behind it, of course, which they will in a big way, I guess, pretty soon. But they're also going to have to manage all these candidates who are going to be even less skilled at this than some of the people in the head office.
And I think some of the parties might be more forgiving of an wayward tweet than others. And Robinson, she seemed to stand behind what she said. It was her opinion. It wasn't just some aloof comment that she made.
Well, just to close off on the U.S. stuff, I mean, one thing that's happened as a result of the early election in 2020 was it moved this election up a year earlier. So we're now, the provincial election's October 19th, 2024. The U.S. election day is 2 weeks later. So the entire provincial election period is going to be, inside of the intense period of American campaigning down south. And I don't think people really appreciate that, like in terms of the potential impact that could have on the BC conversation, because there's, literally billions of dollars of spending that's going to happen in the US on campaigning that's going to spill over into Canada. Now, maybe it nets out, I don't know. But I mean, Geoff, do you think there's any kind of curveballs that could happen based on what's happening in the US that could kind of seep into the
I absolutely do.
conversation
And I think someone who might be you raised this last time, Mike, and I know the problem will be sorted out by the parties, but there's many of the parties are stalling in terms of recruiting candidates and certainly name candidates. And when you see political environments that's this charged and then further heated up by events in the United States, I think it becomes harder to recruit candidates at this stage. Looking back in November, people were clamoring perhaps to join the NDP team because it looked like it was a shoe-in, and Kevin Falcon was struggling. He then began to struggle much harder. I don't know how he would recruit new people at this stage. Maybe people are rushing still to join John Rustad's group, and but the Green Party is going to be very, very lucky to get over 20 or 22 candidates, which is going to have an impact on the number of overall votes they have and that kind of thing. So it's changing as we speak, and I think it'll continue to change. And someone thinking for the first time of running in what looked like a safe seat even 4 months ago must be going, I don't know if I really want to do this.
Well, combining what's the BC political situation with what's happening federally, with fairly robust discussion with Paul-Évan Trudeau, and then add the U.S. election cycle into that. I mean, it won't be for the faint of heart for people to put their name forward. Maybe that emboldens some to do it, but others who maybe are concerned about the toxicity of these discussions, maybe it's harder to get them off the couch to get their name on the ballot. Well, let's talk politics here. BC politics. Once again, a poll was released last week, and our good friends from Main Street, who polls come out of the oven in rapid succession at Main Street. They and it's an IVR poll, the automatic or automated technology that they use has it basically tied. And this is, continues the narrative that's been going on a while with these IVR surveys that basically have the race within single digit, like less than 5% margin or tied. Growing issue for the NDP, do you think, Geoff? Or,
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, as I was saying, it's not that long ago that people were wondering if Kevin Falcon was second or third. Now is he third or fourth? Rustad keeps coming up, and as you've pointed out on a number of occasions, money's now flowing in, which wasn't the case a while ago, and they're recruiting people, including people who recently worked for BC United, who have a lot of information and understanding about the electorate because of the work they did there. So, of course, it's a challenge, and I think it's one that I'm sure David Eby's turning his attention to very quickly as the summer wears on.
Bob, you're a Vernon guy. You've lived in Chilliwack. What do you think's happening outside the big city? What do you think the word on the street is?
I forgot to call my dad before this conversation. He always has his ear to the ground. He often does a protest vote when he's mad at the party that he votes for, which I won't tell you who it is. But yeah, I haven't talked politics outside of my circle of friends in Vancouver, but to what you were saying, Geoff, getting candidates to sign up and getting them excited. I was not going to tell the story because I'm not going to say whose name it is, but one of the candidates was invited to a baseball game coming up this week by some friends of mine, and I happen to be going to this game with them. And so he's been added to the group, and now he wants me to endorse him, and he wants me to make T-shirts showing what's happening, like we're hanging out at this game, and it sort of is a bit desperate in my eyes, and it sort of speaks to every candidate having to get the vote out and to use social media to their advantage, I guess.
Well, yeah.
Sorry, I didn't answer your question. I just went completely around your question. But.
Yeah, no, that's good. I mean, well, let me redirect it back to you.
Okay.
I mean, sometimes here, the people that are obsessed about politics around the media and the political party establishment and the business establishment that's largely, downtown Vancouver, Victoria, right? Obviously see things one way, but then there's the people out in the burbs and in the interior, North Island area that may have missed the memo on what the insiders are thinking and maybe going in the other direction. So, I mean, do you have a gut
I don't think
feeling?
I don't think anybody's really even talking about it yet. To go back to there's no real politics, social media that's relevant or that's really penetrating the average feed, which would be mine and my friends and everybody I know. I think this polling, obviously I follow it a lot closer than the average social media user, but I don't know. I don't know if it's really going to shake out as predicted.
Well, the polling
as hard, like
the polling seems to indicate that what's on the people's minds everywhere in BC is affordability and housing.
Yeah,
kind of go hand in hand with depending on how old you are, healthcare, and those seem to be the issues that are driving people, driving conversation, and to the degree that they are is and decrim, I would say, decriminalization and crime. So if it becomes a referendum on the NDP on how they're handling that issues, then that's going to be mixed news, I think, for the NDP.
I agree with that. I think the question really is how people define the issues when they come out for air after Labor Day and realize, oh, this is in front of me now, and it is in my feed because people are paying for it to be there, that kind of thing. And although Premier Eby's approval is ahead of the parties, which is good news, and he's seen as competent and trusted by lots of people, more so than some of the other leaders. The context of a really bitter fight in the United States, I think, which was going to dominate the airwaves, and it will have an impact, and it'll further assist the conservative side of the equation. Maybe submerge Kevin Falcon even deeper, although I'm not sure how that could happen. So the coming period is quite hard to read because we know what bothers people, but we're not sure yet about how dramatically they wish to make a change in this regard, or whether they're prepared to support David Eby because they know that he's been working on these issues and has made a lot of effort in each of those areas, or whether they're going to take a flyer on the BC Conservatives, who have a lot of, I would say, political baggage on a lot of fronts that's inconsistent with the direction both of the BC United and the BC NDP, and I think a lot of BC voters, like choice on abortion, or where is Rust at on climate change really, which is what would he really do about UNDRIP? Is that a good thing after all the work that's happened in a unanimous vote of the legislature to tear up UNDRIP? Like, those are questions that are not simple ones, but leaders actually have to deal with. And a lot of social media politics is kind of gestural. Like, I saw this happen. I think it's deplorable. It's unacceptable. It's not okay. And I did a good 30 seconds and I'm out of here. The election is really going to be about some very big issues. Like, what are we really going to do about housing? Would it help our economy if we went back to more of a confrontational approach with First Nations? Is it really time to put a question mark over choice on abortion? All that John Rustad will say is that it's a Supreme Court says it's a federal issue. Well, come on, that's ridiculous. It's a really critical values issue. So I think we're going to see a lot of those things rear their heads, as they should, before we make this decision. And John Rustad is going to have finally a lot of explaining to do, which he hasn't up till now.
Well,
beyond that, there hasn't been an option in the past for the conservative, like federally conservative voter, aside from the Liberal Party. So, now that the Conservatives might actually be feasible, in the past, I remember the past elections, it was laughable what they were doing on social media and in the debates, and they became the laughing stock of the election. They didn't present well, but now that they're getting serious, and when you have an option and you live in Prince George and you care about jobs, you're going to be choosing between Kevin Falcon and John Rustad, and the NDP might not even be in that equation.
Mm-hmm. Well, the Conservatives are like a tech startup. They're kind of coming from nothing, and they're on their growth trajectory right now. It's whether like a lot of tech startups is whether they can pull everything together behind it and keep up with their growth. It's kind of an unprecedented situation here, and I don't think anybody really knows what's going to happen yet. But we do know that BC United did lose one of their kind of foundational front benchers, who's announced he's retiring, Michael Lee from Vancouver Langara. I think that was a bit of a surprise. I think Michael tried to deliver that news in a way that was, as constructively as possible for Kevin Falcon's interests. Like, they jointly announced it. Michael Lee was very clear that he was strongly supporting the party. He helped recruit the candidate to replace him. Falcon said very nice words about Michael Lee. So I think they did what they could with the situation they had, but it's a loss for sure. Michael's, he ran for leadership twice. He's one of the few remaining incumbents running for re-election that had some profile, and especially in the Lower Mainland, which is where they're really weak. So it was not a welcome development for BC United for them.
No, and I agree. They managed it as best they could under very difficult circumstances. But I couldn't help but notice that in his farewell statement, Michael Lee included the name of the company he's going to, which I can't remember. I'm not suppressing it, but it has something to do with AI decision making around politics, doesn't it? Which I thought,
Urban
Wow.
Logic. Yeah. Well, I don't claim to know it. It's
For
been
people
around
like
for a
you
few
and me,
years.
Mike, that could be terrible news.
The guy who's one of the key guys in that company is a former political aide at the BC legislature.
Oh,
And so there's an interesting backstory to it. Mark Masongong, and probably mispronounced his last name. But they've been a bit of a darling in the tech sector in their space that they're in. So getting some gray hair. He doesn't really have gray hair, but we'll call Michael Lee having gray hair to help these young guys out to build their business. So, anyways, good
well,
for
I
him,
think
but too
to your
bad.
point too, in the interior, there's strong spokespeople for Kevin Falcon, like Todd Stone and Peter Millibar, but not so. It was Michael Lee down here, as far as I could tell.
Yeah, and I think that leaves Ian Payton and Teresa Watt and Trevor Halford as the only incumbents in the Lower Mainland seeking re-election for BC United, and Kevin Falcon.
Yeah.
So yeah, it makes their job just a little bit tougher. BC United also announced a new campaign manager in the past week. Mark Warner, I don't know him, but is very active in the Guide and Outfitters, and I believe he ran Ellis Ross's leadership campaign. But he drew some interesting reaction when photos emerged of him doing selfies with Donald Trump Jr. and going to the NRA convention. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Did you catch any of that, Bob?
Yeah, and I mean, if I can go back to what I just said, it could be that they're trying to outflank the conservatives by just having that guy on board, and it might not be the bad news that some think it is.
Well, I think they need a jolt of energy. I don't know exactly how they're putting the whole team together, but what any political party needs is someone who's the boss, who is where the buck stops below the leader, who can make those decisions, and then to have a campaign team that has got people with real responsibility delivering on key portfolios in the campaign, whether it's raising money, voter ID, advertising, regional organizers, managing the people, all that kind of stuff. And so it's only as good as the people below you and their ability to deliver. And obviously the fundraising numbers weren't as strong last quarter for them, so they're going to be pressed on resources a bit. So this, Mark Werner's going to have his hands full. He's going to have to set a new tone, but it's he's definitely coming in on a challenging file here, given where the poll numbers are. And he said publicly that oh no, the rumors of our death have been greatly exaggerated, if I can paraphrase that. So, anything else you're seeing, Geoff, politically in the past week that caught your attention?
Well, I see the premier now going on this equalization attack, and it is sort of bizarre. I wouldn't begin to pretend that I understand equalization, except to say that it takes wealth from wealthier parts of the country and distributes them to less wealthy parts, which is a good idea and part of nation building. And that's meant that over the years, a lot of money has flowed from Alberta and Ontario and Quebec to other places. But now, for reasons that I can't begin to explain, none is coming to British Columbia, although some has from time to time, and none to Newfoundland, which is not notably super well developed. And so you see this coast-to-coast alliance between Andrew Furey and David Eby to say, hey, it's time to discuss this. So I think it's a good talking point for the Premier going into the fall, that we got a problem here, and the problem lies in the equalization formula. It's not something that has British Columbians awake at night, but more money into the Treasury on an equitable basis would be a good thing.
So he's at Council Federation this week,
in Halifax,
which burns 3 or 4 days for him during a limited pre-election window left. So those Council Federation, I'm not sure what you felt about them. I did a couple of them myself. It's they're always kind of fun from a staff perspective, because you're there with all the premiers and see all these individuals and how they interact, but absolutely zero attention given by the public about anything that happens at these meetings.
Well, the main thing about them is that that when they're over, the summer begins in earnest. There's actually some real downtime. Most Canadians have checked out weeks ago. But also when you spend a bit of time around them, and when I was working for John Horgan, of course, we spent a lot of time on phone calls with all the premiers, and you do come away from time to time as a proud Canadian wondering how we got this far with this weird bumblebee of a structure that we have called federalism.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
really hard to see how we make headway. The debates are very obscure. So,
okay, well let's head to the minibar.
Let's raise a glass or take a shot. Time to raid the minibar.
Touches on a couple of themes we talked about today. I'm going to raise a glass to Provincial Health Officer Bonnie Henry, who brought out a controversial report this week, which is saying that notwithstanding the clear discomfort from the government, which has already rejected the idea, she believes there needs to be consideration given to prescription of safe supplies of drugs to people with substance use disorders. And I haven't read the report, so I'm not sure. I don't think politically it's going to happen, obviously, and I wasn't sure before it came out. But I do credit her as an independent officer with going without fear and unflinching into these discussions, which is exactly what her job description is to look at the public health of British Columbians. And I ran into her recently at an airport. She was returning from a vacation, and it was the first time I'd seen her in some time with no personal protective detail. She has had to have extra police protection for very real threats, including people outside her house, for on to 4 years, partly because of the COVID crisis and now this. So I'm a huge fan of Bonnie Henry, and I raise a glass to her and thank her for her courage to continue doing the job and to say what she thinks needs to be said, whether it's popular or not.
Well, I noticed that even, John Rust has been very outspoken against her for some time.
Two parties want to fire her. Yeah.
Well, now Kevin Falcon's joined the course to seek her. That's quite a change in compared to where we were a couple of years ago during COVID, where I don't think any politician would try to touch her politically, but such as it is now that these issues are evolving. Bob, what about you in the minibar?
Speaking of not touching things politically, this is not a political thing, but I'm going to raise a glass to all of the BC conservation officers who have to police the campfire ban that just came into place. It's a thankless job. It's a dangerous job. That's why they carry Glocks in the forest, and it's an important job. So all those people out there.
Cheers, hear.
I'm contemplating telling the story about my apprehension of a cougar sometime, but Bob, maybe I'll leave that for another day. Thanks to
tell us the story of the cougar.
Well, I do have a cougar in a box at home right now. I have a cougar in a box that showed up on my property some years ago, and I killed the cougar. And
it's still in a box?
I killed the cougar with a phone call to a conservation officer, but came up with the cougar hounds, ran the cougar up a tree, and as the lifeless cougar was being taken away, it was like, hey, can we get that cougar? So he's now a rug.
Why is he in a box?
Well, do you really put a cougar rug in your living room?
Why do you have a rug? Why do you have a cougar rug in the first place if you're not going to put it somewhere?
Why not have a cougar rug? But my cat, Snickers, is decidedly not sure what to make of the cougar as well. So, Snickers, it's a hard sell. So, anyways,
I'll raise a glass to the person. I will raise a glass to the person that convinces you to put it on your wall and commit to owning the thing, and then the person that convinces you to name the cougar.
I will invite you over to meet the Mr. Cougar one day.
Thank you.
So I'd like to, first of all, take a shot at what I heard on the radio this morning with great moral clarity. Peter Millibar, the MLA for Kamloops and former mayor and many other things. Peter was taking the charge against a new fee for paper bags in BC stores. And I thought, boy, what a terrible time to introduce a fee on paper bags right before a provincial election. What are they thinking? And I just know that's going to piss people off. Like, kill why they don't we still have a forest industry? Why are we charging people for paper bags? Like this is it's our
your
it's our
shots at
right to have free paper bags.
your
in
shots at
British
George Heyman,
Columbia.
not Peter Millibar.
No,
I may,
I am complimenting Peter Millibar for taking a
okay.
shot.
Okay.
Peter Millibar had the moral clarity to raise this as an issue. Thank you for
if I
making
may,
sure I clearly
many,
said that, Geoff.
if not all of the big grocery stores already charge. Jimmy Pattison charges anytime you want to buy, anytime you want to have a paper bag anyways. So it's basically
Jimmy
just
Pattison
putting
would
a
probably
stamp on it.
charge for air if he could.
Oh,
But,
wow.
well, he's a businessman. He's trying to monetize things.
I thought you were trying to get him on the show. When are we getting him? When are you going to get him on the show? You just put a nail in the coffin.
Why were they had Glenn Clark? So there he is again. Ding ding. Anyways, so taking a shot at the paper bag charge. To be clear, compliments to Peter Millibar for raising it on CKNW this morning. But I'd also like to raise a glass to Michael Lee. We touched on it earlier, but he had a distinguished run in opposition, in my opinion, and it's unfortunate that guys like Michael Lee didn't get a chance to take a turn in at the cabinet table. And he got elected in 2017 and just watched the furniture get moved within weeks of taking office and having Geoff move in. But
The John Horgan team.
Yeah, he had a lot to contribute, and he did contribute a lot. And he brought a great tone to the legislature, and certainly on issues around October 7th was an example where he was part of that kind of important nonpartisan spirit that emerged on that and other issues. So, anyways, Michael, good luck in your new responsibilities in the private sector that will start soon. Anyways, thank you. I'd like to thank our guest, Dr. Andrew Weaver, today, for agreeing to come on Hotel Pacifico. And thanks to Bob Kronbauer, BC Bob, for joining us in Strategy Suite. Bob, I hope you come back soon.
Good to see you, Bob.
Nice to see you guys. Thanks for having me.
And thank you to our presenting sponsors, TELUS and Fortis BC. We'll see you next week. BC, you can never leave.
Checkout time at Hotel Pacifico. We hope you enjoyed your stay.